I'm Jondrew from the official GonnaGeek.com show, a weekly geek news podcast that is a part of the GonnaGeek network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other awesome geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to episode 209 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we talk about ways you can keep working on your podcast while you take a break over the holidays.
In this week's Better Podcasting download, we discuss how to avoid the question, whatever happened to my podcast?
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we have some listeners in a conversation about how to best balance listener engagement.
Lauren, start the show now so the listeners can think of the irony.
Welcome to Better Podcasting. With a combined history of over 1,000 episodes, and starting as early as 2008, we are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast. Here are the hosts for the show, Stephen Jondrew and Stargate Pioneer.
Welcome to episode 209 of Better Podcasting. I am Stephen Jondrew, and I am pleased to say that the Thanksgiving man, SP, is here this week.
It is the night before Thanksgiving as we are recording this. As this episode is published, we'll be full into the Northern American holiday season, and this is the rush to the end of the year. It's just going to be a fun time, and we are glad to be podcasting tonight. It is fun not being on the road in a major storm, because most of the United States is in a major storm right now, and I'm glad I'm not involved in that. But to get to the Better Podcasting content, Stephen, we've been running a contest / request for listeners for the past few weeks. As this episode drops, we have reached the due date, but we might want to extend that one more week.
Yeah, so if you didn't know this, we have been asking people to send in their one thing submission. Essentially, we want you to think about the year 2020 and what is one thing that you want to work on for your podcast. We've had a couple of submissions so forth, and the idea behind this is that we can share some of these ideas on the show over the course of maybe a couple different episodes and just let everybody brainstorm a little bit about how they want to direct their focuses for their podcast. We're big advocates here of having a plan for your year. And so that can all sometimes start by choosing just one thing that you want to work on for 2020. Now, as SP said, we're also running a contest. If you send that in, you have an opportunity to possibly win a Samson Q2U. We're going to take all of the submissions, put them in a draw, and draw one person and give it away. Now, we were going to end this at the end of December, but given that this Canadian forgot a little bit about the fake Thanksgiving, the American Thanksgiving at the end of November, let's go ahead and extend this by a week. And if you want to go ahead and send this to us, the submission to us, by Saturday, December 7th, 2019, we will get you into that draw as well. So again, you have until Saturday, December 7th to send us your one thing. And then again, we'll go ahead and try to share some of those as we go through future episodes of the show. SP, you have sent me a one thing, and I believe that it is the same thing that you say every year, which is fire me. I think that's your one thing again this year.
Yeah, it was my one thing. But beyond that one thing, I will have something else, and we'll talk about it. And if you're still working on last year's, by the way, which is creeping back more and more, and it's really bugging me because we've been talking about it on the show the last few weeks, it's me saying so. I hate saying that. I hate editing it. I hate hearing it. So I hate it, period. I do edit it out in the most cases that on the shows that I edit. I'm sure that Steven leaves them in here. And it's one of the reasons why I listen to the show very, very fast, because I don't like myself actually saying the word so. And by the way, it's not so wing like SEW. It's so SO or SOO. My vernacular can go on without it. But aside from that, I am going to have one other thing for 2020 because that was my one thing for 2019. I'm going to choose another one for 2020. So hang on for next month, and we will get into our one things.
As SP mentioned, when this episode releases, it'll be December, which means that the holiday season is in full swing for many people. And this means that it's really time for you to lock in your decision on how you're going to handle this holiday season with your podcast. When it comes to handling the holiday season, there's really kind of two main mindsets. The first is that because there's holidays and there are a lot of things happening and some gifts that are being given, there are some statistics that could possibly indicate that there are new ears coming to podcasting over the holiday season. Some people are getting new devices. Some people just have more time to check out some new shows. Some people are just really disappointed that Better Podcasting has taken a break. So now they're looking at other shows as well. There's all sorts of statistics to support that this might be the case. And so the theory is that you should keep pushing through, and this is your opportunity to shine. The second option, the one that we here at Better Podcasting firmly believe in, is that the holiday season is busy enough, and as a hobby podcaster, we think that you should take time to recharge your batteries and just take a little bit of a break from your podcast over the holiday season. Now, our personal belief on why we recommend this is because we think that if you're not taking time to recharge those batteries, you may just burn out. So while you might potentially lose a few of those listeners that we just mentioned a minute ago, it's a lot better to lose that potential than actually lose your listeners when you pod fade because you're a hobbyist trying to balance your podcasting with your family time, with all of the other things that you have going on over the course of December. So when we do say we believe in this, we truly do mean it. In fact, look at the back history of this show. We have a track record to show that we do this every year. There's a 1 week gap in the show, but for those of you who may have listened for a while, we actually have a couple week break in the actual recording schedule the way that we do it, because we really want to take that time to recharge our batteries. But here's the thing. While this is giving you an opportunity to recharge your batteries and take a little bit of a break from your show, it doesn't mean that you have to take your foot right off of that Cybertruck e-throttle for your podcast. Today, we want to talk about some of the ways you could just keep your foot on that e-throttle, that pedal, just a little bit.
What are some of the things that you could do to keep going with your podcast, even if you're taking a publishing break? First, since you'll be taking a break with your show, perhaps now would be a good opportunity to revise some of those smaller elements of this show. Given that we literally just did an entire episode on revising your show, we won't go over a full list here. However, the gist of this is that it's a great opportunity to create things like new bumpers, new images, new show art, new graphics, segment intros, a podcast intro, outros, etc. All those elements of your show you can actually update or create new for your show while you're taking the break. We have done this on multiple occasions through all of our shows, and we'll get into further examples inside this show. But on GonnaGeek, Stephen, you've taken the opportunity to refresh several elements with that show as well.
Yeah, because the GonnaGeek show is just like this show where it's a full video companion. Often I've used this holiday break to just try different visuals, try different things, just let sort of those creative juices flowing when I have time to do this, because sometimes I book off some time around Christmas, and so I don't have to worry about going to work the next day. Sometimes I just stay up a little late, just start tinkering in my graphics software, which is Affinity Photo, by the way, and just keep letting those creative juices flow and try different things. It's just an example I thought I would share how I'm able to do that during the holiday season that I don't usually have a time to do elsewhere.
Another thing that you can keep working on your podcast while you're taking a publishing break is to take that time and that opportunity to brainstorm some ideas for your show and create a roadmap for the next year, for the next 5 years, for the next month, whatever it is. Try to get ahead of where you really want to go with your topics and your podcast. Think about that last time that you had a really interesting idea that popped into your head. Where exactly did that happen? Was it somewhere very odd, like in the shower or in the gym while you're running, while you're driving? All those locations where it's very difficult to actually write something down. It's amazing how many good ideas come when you're least expecting them. And as such, when you take some time off, it can be a great opportunity for you to get those brainstorming juices going and capture those brainstorms as they come.
Brainstorming juices. What does that taste like? Is that like an apple or an orange? Like, what is that brainstorming juice?
Well, since tomorrow is Thanksgiving in the United States, we have taste in terms of pies. You know, is it going to be a pumpkin juice pie? Is it going to be a cherry juice pie? Is it going to be an apple juice pie? You know, there's so many pies. Pecan, there's so many pies, so many tastes.
You missed the opportunity. The obvious answer was cranberry juice, like the cranberry sauce. You missed it.
Anyway, we'd recommend that you keep a list going where you can jot down ideas as they come to you. You never know when you're going to have one of those shower moments. It could be something like a cell phone dictation. It could be an actual written. It could be a note on your smart device, like your A-word device from Amazon or your G-word device from Google. Did I just say that? G-word device from Google? Anyway. You can make it more formal. You could set yourself a goal to come up with an idea every X days. People do this at work all the time. Take newsrooms, for example. You have to pitch a certain amount of stories just to get X amount of stories talked about on air. Sometimes the stories are just obvious because it's news that's happening around you. But maybe you have to do some investigative journalism. Maybe you have to have some good thought pieces in there because people want to hear good news along with all the bad stuff that happens. So these ideas are pitched in a pitch session, and you have to come to those pitch sessions with 2, 3, 5 ideas every time just to make sure that the actual news or whatever you're doing actually gets done. So you can set yourself a goal to come up with some ideas every day, one a day, one every other day, whatever it is, to make sure by the end of your holiday break that you have X amount of ideas that you can actually use with your show.
So basically what you're saying is that you need to perfectly pitch those ideas to yourself. Thus, you're pitch perfect. Is that what you're saying?
I still haven't seen the end of Pitch Perfect 3, by the way, but the first 2.5, I'm all in. So that's pretty good. But you can also make this idea of pitching ideas to yourself or your co-host more structured. For example, perhaps you want to start scheduling a spreadsheet for your future episodes and fill out a rough draft of the topics that you want to cover week to week. Now, we talked about this before in mapping the future of your show, but it stands to reason that this could work here too in the holidays, where you are trying to map out where you're going to go with the show in the next few months or the next year or whatever. Because if you come up with enough ideas, you can get a full year or two of path forward. And we talked about planning your show a few years ago. We did a 3-episode arc on it. And there are definite things that you can do on that level with your podcast as well. You could also take the opportunity to try out some of those things that you've had on your let's see if I get around to it list for a while. Yeah, I have a I want to get around to it list. Steven, do you have a I want to get around to it list?
I have many.
For example, if you want to try out that new recording style, if you want to test out a new publishing workflow, if you want to try out a new piece of software like audio editing, you want to do a different form of MP3 tagging, if you want to use a different tagger, a program that actually tags like Tag and Rename that I use. I love the thing. If you want to try that out, go ahead. Or even trying something massive like a sample run of a new podcast. If you have the time to sit down and do it over a few days in the holidays, what a great time to actually start getting those creative juices flowing on a new show while you have a moment rather than to try to cram it in 20 minutes a night after dinner.
Now, one of the ways that this can be done is catching up on those backdated emails. It's really easy when you're podcasting to get backlogged with emails and not get a chance to respond to all of them. Well, you have a bit of a break. Maybe you can chip away at that inbox of yours to catch up with some of your audience. But you might also look to be a little bit more engaged on social media. Maybe you're going to run some polls or solicit some feedback, tease future show ideas, or my favorite thing, which is engaging with Stargate Pioneer at Stargate Pioneer on Twitter on an hourly basis. Seriously, hourly. Tweet him, tag him, demand he responds. Now, one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite things to do is because when you have your family over for the holiday season and they're just yakking about things you don't care about, you're not going to go and be rude and go down to your podcast den or your studio or whatever, but you could pull out your phone and be rude and just engage with your listeners and then just tell your family, sorry, I got more important people, my podcast listeners. I need to talk to them, not you. That's my favorite way to handle a family.
Might be your way, but I would highly advise against doing that to our listeners. Oh my gosh, Stephen, that's bad advice. No, you engage with your family when you're with them because you never know when that last day is going to come. I'm not trying to be morbid here. I'm just trying to savor the moment and enjoy your holidays. Find something fun that you can do with your family. If you want to listen to a podcast together, there's tons available. Go on, and they might understand what you do then.
I know what you do. You tell them all about tweeting at Stargate Pioneer on an hourly basis. Get them in on it too.
We're just going to move on. However, you could also think about the benefits that could come with not having to bust out your microphone for a week or two. For example, is there something that this allows you to do that normally would be hard to pull off on a regular week with a podcast? Perhaps you've been putting off an entire studio rewiring. You want to get shorter cords, moving equipment around, adding power cleaners, power converters. Maybe there's something in the studio that you're needing to move around. Like you want to move the actual furniture desk. You want to move the mixer from the right side to the left side, or from the left side to the right side, from on top of the desk, underneath the desk, whatever. Maybe you want to install that convertible stand-up desk. So when you get really frustrated when you're recording, you can sit down or stand up and take your whole desk with you, but that's going to require different cords and your camera with you too, by the way, Stephen. For those audio listeners, Stephen actually stood up and we were looking at his chest rather than his face, which actually might be the better version of Stephen anyway. Moving on, is there a new microphone that you've been waiting to hook up and get the levels just right? Different microphones require different levels, different ways to use. You have to position them differently, perhaps, and depending on if it's an end address microphone or a side address microphone. Sometimes it can be helpful to have some time to record a sample, make some tweaks, and come back and review that and happen it all over again in a OODA loop. This can happen while you're away from your show, not impacting your show, not trying to get it done in a half an hour on a Saturday or a Sunday when you really should be doing other things. So take the time while you have it to do those sorts of tweaks. In the past, I've actually used this holiday time to reorganize elements in my show. Things like updating RSS feed elements to be with new distribution requirements, updating episode ID 3 tag elements to do the same thing. And for example, we're talking about episode numbers into or out of titles, depending on how you're moving things, creating an Apple Podcast specific title for your episodes, adding episode numbers in the tag for each episode, taking out episode numbers in the tag for each episode. These are things that take a lot of time, especially if you have 100, 200, 300 episodes. Even with media hosting service provider tools, these updates to your show or shows, if you have multiple shows, can take some time, and you have the time over the holidays, and it might be the perfect time to do it. Some other updates include file storage and backup plans. We always talk about backupping your files here on Better Podcasting. Perhaps this involves adding a new online storage service or a new, bigger external USB hard drive. Maybe it's time to update your geographically separated storage, especially if you house it in your family's house, which is across the country. Now would be a perfect time as you visit them over the holidays to bring that with you. You can also do file cleanup. Have you been a little lax over the past year on how you store your files? Perhaps you never set up a file structure for the long term in the first place, and that's starting to bite you in the rear end and trying to find your files when you're trying to reuse them or update files that in episodes that you've done in the past. Maybe you're trying to create those audiograms. Maybe you have the same file that's stored in 10 different places on the same hard drive. This time of year is perfect to clean up those file structures so you can find things or get rid of unwanted file duplicates. but not get rid of the backup files. These are just duplicate files that you have in 10 different places on your hard drive. And don't forget those annual updates, such as updating the copyright in your episode ID 3 tags, or updating your RSS level or show level copyright date, recording that new intro or outro with the new copyright date. Maybe you want to update your website copyright dates. And Stephen thinks I am pointing at him because he's been really lax on that in one of his shows. But really, this is something that bites everybody in the rear end. And it even bit me in the rear end earlier in this year, where I went like 2 months of Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. not having 2019 in the copyright until I finally was able to get my daughter, who does the voiceover for the end, in the studio to actually record a new outro with the new copyright date. So it's not just you, Stephen. It's everybody. When you go from year to year, you need to update those copyright dates all over the place. And the holidays is a perfect time to do that.
One of the things that you might consider doing is actually researching new podcast material. We've mentioned some brainstorming of future topics, but it's always a good idea to take time to research new content for your show. Maybe this can stem from books or films or other podcasts for references, or maybe it's just experiencing life related to your podcast topic. Perhaps you're going to a magical place like New York City at Christmas and New Year's, or you're going to Walt Disney World to check out that awesome Star Wars exhibit. Maybe you're going to go to the Bahamas and take SP with you, or you might possibly hire SP to charter that next sailboat cruise.
Might be a 3-hour cruise too.
If you're doing something about drones, perhaps you're looking to take your FAA Part 107 exam or recertification so you can continue to fly the drone in the capacity that you need to reference your podcast and build off of that. Or maybe you're just going to buy your next project, like a model or a 3D printer or a new drone. SP has 30 of them now. Or a new musical instrument, especially because you know you're going to start making your own custom intro or outro with that. So it's a tax write-off. Just a joke. I am not a legal expert or a tax expert.
No, but a lot of people like to do that. Like if you get a new synthesizer, you could actually use it as multiple instruments and record your next intro or outro. A lot of people are musically inclined that are podcasters, just like a lot of people are artistically inclined, so they can make their new graphics. This might be a perfect time to do that. Maybe you want to take a new style of exercise class, like you're doing this sort of boxing class and you just want to go to a yoga class, something like that. Maybe you want to sample a new type of drink or food and just live life. And this is a perfect time to do it where you're not locked down to the same time every week of recording your show, editing your show, publishing your show, and promoting your show. I mean, maybe that is your life, but there is more to life than podcasting. You should get out and experience it while you have a chance.
You also might look to create new merchandise, because if you have hundreds of IAB certified engaged listeners, maybe it's time to think about creating some merchandise for your podcast. Now, while we don't have merchandise for Better Podcasting, largely because, let's be honest here, nobody wants to wear Better Podcasting merchandise because it has something to do with me, and nobody wants to wear something that has to do with me. But if you have this, you might be looking at doing some coffee cups that you can go ahead and drink on camera if you're doing a video thing, or just enjoy or sell to your people. You might end up having shirts or sweaters or hats that you want to have in your merchandise store, or maybe something like stickers. No matter what you've decided to do for your merchandise, whether you're creating it for the first time or updating it, this can be a good time to do that. But maybe you also want to start dabbling in the money territory. You might want to get into some crowdfunding. Again, we don't talk about money here at Better Podcasting, but when we do, it's just a surface overview like we're going to do. Like if you are looking to take your first steps into crowdfunding, look into the different services such as Patreon. Think about what would be involved with those, like reward tiers, and understand the tax implications, because again, it's income. So maybe now's a good time to think about that. You're probably not going to get advice on that over the holidays because the tax accountants are probably all on holidays, but you could maybe get your ducks in a row so you can send them an email and hear back from them eventually.
Yeah, you can also, talking about legal agreements, you can go over your written agreements between your co-host or whoever else is on your podcast. We bring this one up often, but in case you do not already have a written agreement in place with your co-host, or like I said, anybody else that helps you produce your show, now is as good of a time as any to have that discussion. If you can, nail down that agreement now if you don't have one. If you already have one, make sure you're revising it and looking at it. And does it still make sense? Is there something that we need to change? Will all parties agree on the change? This is all stuff that you need to go over. But at the very least, understand who is responsible for paying what on the show. We also recommend a more robust agreement in writing that covers not only now, but the future what ifs with your show. If you happen to make a lot of money with your show, this can be a issue that breaks you apart, like the bands. Like bands break apart over different issues. Money is one of them, and you don't want to break apart over money when you got a good thing going, but I understand if you think you do. So make sure those written agreements are good now for the future.
Plus, this is the perfect time to do it because we've talked about it. It can be a very difficult thing to talk about these future agreements and all of the things that come with that. And that's a hard conversation to have. But getting back to the family, you're right now probably seeing family over the holidays. And let's be honest, those conversations are even more stressful and even more difficult than this agreement. So it's like this is a cakewalk compared to visiting with your family.
All right. Although these are some of our thoughts over what you can do over the holidays, you can also brainstorm ways that you can help your podcast by reviewing some of your overdue action lists. If you happen to have a Trello list, make sure you give that a once over. Do you happen to have a paper list? Go over that as well. Do you have ideas that are circling in the back of your mind that are not written down? We talked about that before. Make sure you write those down. No matter where you have these lists, it's a great opportunity to review them right now over the holidays and see what sort of things you can do to improve on them and scratch off the to-do list items on those lists.
Now, one thing that we do want to make sure we stress is that whatever you decide to do, you should make sure that you still place your focus first and foremost on spending time with your loved ones. All joking aside from the family comments that I mentioned, really, if you've decided that you do want to take a break from your podcast and focus instead on other things, you should really make sure to focus on doing that. Relax, and again, recharge those batteries. It's important that you don't stack that plate too full. Thanksgiving's the time to overstack your plate. For this, you don't want to do that. So definitely make sure to take your time to enjoy yourself and recharge those batteries. You don't want to make this into a stressful experience because you have just put too much on your to-do list. As such, we really recommend that you kind of take this action list that you formulated for during your break and divide it into two main categories. First, a must-do list, things that you must get done. And secondly, a I hope to do it list. And we recommend that you keep this must-do list to very few items, maybe 2 or 3. Keep it simple if you've decided that you are going to take a break for your podcast, because if you put too much on that must-do list and you end up going through the holidays and it's unattainable, you're going to go into the new year looking at that list and thinking of it as a failure because you didn't accomplish what was on that list, which might leave you feeling a little deflated going into 2020. So we definitely think while it does benefit you to keep moving forward to a degree with your podcast, keep it simple if you've decided to take a break. And again, prioritize spending time with your family and recharging those batteries. Oh, and also tweeting Stargate Pioneer hourly. That is also up on that list.
It's a great time to get yourself set up to accomplish some wrap-up items for the year before. In this case, it's 2019, but in case you listen to this in years future, whatever year you're coming to a close, and get ready for that next year. It's really important to do that. And remember, also, you're going to have holidays in the future. You might have summer holidays, or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you're going to have winter holidays around the June, July timeframe. So just keep those in mind as well. But this is the big time. This is the time where you're going to have a couple weeks normally where things start winding down before things start winding back up. So take the time, spend a time with your family, get yourself recharged, but also take advantage to do those 1 to 2 to 3 things with your podcast that are really going to matter heading into the next year.
At Stargate Pioneer on Twitter.
This is the Better Podcasting Download.
SP, whatever happened to that podcast that you did that was all about myself?
Never existed, but funny you should ask. I've been noticing, we've been talking about it on the show. I am a Redditor. I seem to be falling into being a Reddit connoisseur for the podcasting subreddits over there on Reddit. And one of the questions that I see quite regularly on like the listener subreddits, like podcasts with an S, is a post at least once, if not twice or more a week of whatever happened to X podcast. And X could be anything. It could be a really famous podcast that has pod faded for years. It could be an obscure podcast that I've never heard of, but a lot of people have listened to in the past. And it's just the question of whatever happened to it. So I was like, this is a good thing to actually talk about to actual podcasters. So I switched gears. I went to the podcasting subreddit and I made a post titled "How to Avoid Whatever Happened to," quote unquote, questions about your podcast. And you can find this at geeks.link/whatever happened. And I just go through why it's important and then the steps of what you would want to take as a podcaster yourself to make sure that you don't hear those questions, because it will be evident to anybody that's listening to your podcast what happened.
Which, by the way, I can say right now, the best way that you avoid this is you suck like I do at podcasting and nobody ever listens. Thus, the question is never asked.
I've heard the question asked of other podcasts that I've listened to in recent that have just pod faded. And I was like, you know what? I would like to know what happened to those shows. And if somebody's listening to my show, like we'll have to talk about this in a future episode in the upcoming weeks of what's happening with Starling Tribune. The show is ending, by the way, when Arrow ends. We've made that decision, but we will get into why in a future episode. How's that for a tease, Stephen?
I like it. I love that tease.
But I was like, there are certain things that we should be doing as we wind down Starling Tribune that are directly applicable. So my mindset was there. My mindset was also on other shows that I've listened to in the past that aren't available to listen to anymore. And I wanted to give podcasters a roadmap of things that they should be thinking about. So stuff like making good quality content to begin with. Now, Stephen, you made a joke that your podcast sucked. Now, if your podcast does suck, there's probably not going to be a lot of listeners that really care about it. Maybe your mom, maybe your dad are listening. They're like, hey, son, hey, daughter, whatever happened to that podcast you did? And you're like, I don't know, the files were out there and they're gone. And you just don't want anybody to listen to them ever again. But there are podcasts that are well done. You've put a lot of effort into them. And even though you've only had 12 episodes, 100 episodes, 200 episodes, whatever you've decided to be the end episode, then the podcast just disappears and it's nowhere to be found anywhere. You'd think that if it's on the internet, it's on the internet forever. Well, here's the funny thing about that. Storage costs money. Bandwidth costs money. So if you have these files that are 50 to 200 megabits, they just add up over time. And it would cost somewhere to host it, which is why usually you don't find any of this stuff just randomly available, because you need space to store it. So make good content. Make sure that you have a storage place that is foreverable. I talk about why you might not want to go with a free hosting site, why you might want to choose archive.org and the things that you'll have to do in order to make that work, because I have seen that done, but it is not free. Now, the storage for your podcast might be free, but it is not free to make them available through an RSS feed. and backing up the episodes. Like I said, maybe you have a listener that's like, hey, I just wanted to hear episode 14 again. It was so great of an episode. It spoke to me, but my computer dumped it. Can I find it anywhere to download? And if you have moved on to your next computer, your next tablet, and it's not part of the storage that you took over, or it was part of some online storage, cloud storage that's there, and it's just going to be missing. So you have to worry about what you want to do for backups for long-term storage. We've talked about that on the show before. And you also want to give a conclusion. You don't want to just leave it hanging. You want to be there and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. We're ending the show. And perhaps you might even want to say, hey, look, this other show that's like ours might be to your liking. So maybe you want to check that out. Maybe in our case, we have the GonnaGeek Network. Maybe you want to check out other shows on the GonnaGeek Network. You always want to leave them with something that they can go to because they're listeners of your show. They want to keep listening to something like that. And basically, if you follow these steps and others that are in the article, which you can find at Geeks.Link/whatever happened, you will be setting up your show so that it will not necessarily have a question about whatever happened to your show. There still might be a question, but at least people can point to, hey, look over here.
Yeah, I think that this is a very solid piece of advice that you've put together. I think it's helpful for a lot of people. And somebody who is, maybe I'll call myself the king of the pod fade because I have pod faded a show and I'm all about the pod fade, podfade.com. I myself might personally recommend to highlight the part where you say, tell your audience, because I've done it where I haven't told my audience at the end. And I've done it where I've told my audience at the end. And while I did get a bunch of backlash right at the end of the show where they're like, no, you can't end the show. They knew that it was the end. The other one, occasionally I'd get the message. You coming back? What's happening? And SP also wrote me lots of letters asking if I was bringing that show back. He wrote me one every day for 3 years.
No, that didn't happen at all. But I've also done the same thing. I've done this is the end of the show and this is where you can find us in the future. And I have also done this is the last episode and there just isn't another episode and there was no indication that the podcast was ending. That was a tough decision to make, but it had been so long that I just decided it better just keep it where it is. I still have that feed and I can start it up whenever I want. And it's actually a podcast. It's about comic books that I could start up again whenever, and it would not be a big deal. And I always regret not having on there a statement that the podcast has ended or it's pod faded or whatever, but it's linked to another show I have. So if people are wondering what happened, they can always come over to us on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. The other podcast that I was talking about is Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Longbox. So it's a little bit different situation. I still regret not saying anything about it.
Me too on mine. I totally agree with you. And I think technically I could add it, but it would be a whole bunch of redirect things I'd have to do to get it to its current sitting location. And I just don't feel like doing that. So moral of the story, follow SP's advice. Again, that's geeks.link/whatever happened. And let's go ahead and move on to the Better Podback.
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Podback.
If you head to betterpodcasting.com/Discord, you will be taken to the GonnaGeek Discord server. This is a place where people can chat. In there is a dedicated what's called channel for Better Podcasting, where there's a lot of podcasting talk happening. And this week, there was one listener that posed a question that had a couple different responses to it. And I thought it was just such a great discussion point. SP, go ahead and read this question.
I also thought it was great. It was very insightful, and I had seen some similar conversations going on in different locations. So glad it ended up in our Discord. So Jim Video posted, many of my favorite podcasts have fans of the show that contribute so much that it is hard to imagine the podcast without them. What are the best practices for podcasting and superfans? Oh, I love that word, superfans. So I replied, I said, great question, since I was a super fan once. I was. We talked about it before, Galactic Water Cooler. I was. And I also commented, it depends on how much you want to be open to outsiders. And I said that, asking for more information, but also with the knowledge that if you let outsiders in too much, that it might create some conflict that you really don't want, because it is your show. It is not their show. And it was so great because Yakko Doctor, who is Jeremy from the Transmissions podcast, came in with pretty much the same exact thought. He said, quote, "We have a few super fans that go a little overboard. So we just try to include a few of their contributions, but it's a careful balance. I don't want them to feel like they deserve to be on the show, but I also don't want to push them away."
We also had Damien the DM say, "I like how Better Podcasting handles its quote super fans, end quote. We are known, but we aren't put on any sort of pedestal. We get brought up for interacting, but when new people are around, I feel that they, brackets rightfully, end bracket, take precedent. I see this in another show I listen to. They have discussion questions from the community and read out responses. Obviously, those who interact often show up a lot, but when it comes to running shorter on time, those regulars will get skipped over in favor of people who aren't heard from as often." Yes, we've done that here on this show, and I'll give a shout out to a couple different individuals, one of which is Johnny Pennington. He emails us all the time. Unfortunately, we can't always get that on the show. Another one, Damien the DM, he regularly messages with USB. Again, can't always get that on the show. So we do sometimes try to balance, as was said earlier, balance that. And I think that it's really important for this because of the fact that you want to make sure you encourage your new listeners to submit things. And if they're hearing the same voices over and over and over, they might think there's this exclusive club. Is that people in the Patreon group? Is that people on Facebook? Where is these people who are getting their questions in? And how do I become a part of that clique? If you do put a few of those new names in occasionally, they start to understand, oh, okay, it's not just certain individuals. So I totally agree with what everybody said on this. And I think that there is a balance that's involved.
There is. I actually ended this conversation and I said, we value all of our listeners on Better Podcasting and all of the listeners that interact with us, but we try to be all inclusive as well. While there's always room for improvement, we so like to highlight shows and names of listeners we haven't heard on our episodes before. It helps everyone discover new shows and it helps foster community involvement. And that's why people that have been listening to the show for 200 episodes might not get highlighted as much as newer people, is we're really trying to bring the whole community together and highlight new shows to everybody as well, not just the old staples. But I mean, we say it all the time.
Pod.
That we go ahead and we mention just because we have that gag with it. Johnny Pennington doesn't have a show yet. We keep on telling him he needs to have a show. Xandrax, he has his great Geekville radio show. We mention these from time to time because they contribute with great facts and great stuff for us to talk about on the show, depending on what the topic is. And we really appreciate it. But we mention them more in passing as we go through it, rather than really highlight the show, what it's about and where you can find it, because we've talked about it before. And this is not a knock on any of the long-term listeners. We really enjoy having the long-term listeners with us. It's just that they are long-term listeners and we know that they know, and everybody's a podcaster. Everybody gets it. So it's no big deal, but we do appreciate everybody that listens to this show, especially new listeners.
So if you want to be one of those new listeners, get in touch with us through any of the ways. You can tweet us at BetterPod. You can find us on Facebook.com/BetterPodcasting. Email us podcast@betterpodcasting.com or come to our Discord server at betterpodcasting.com/Discord and ask an awesome question like was asked this week, or just come in and give a fun fact. Again, betterpodcasting.com/Discord. Again, we do stream this show live on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time at Geeks.Live. But we're going to have a bit of a rocky schedule over December. In theory, we should keep going on Wednesdays. However, on Wednesday, December 18th, we will likely be starting a little bit earlier and having a back-to-back recording with a little bit of a gap in between. It's just going to depend on a couple of variables. But then after that, we won't be returning back until into January live. Because again, we do stream the show live. And as we mentioned, we like to take that break, which means there'll be a double recording for the live viewers that week of December 18th. We hope that if you haven't had a chance to check out the live stream before, at some point you come by, you can see all the different mistakes we make. It doesn't happen often. Tonight, there was just a one or two that were made. But if you want to see all of the errors that were made and then maybe compare it to the edited version, you can see that when we do stream live on Wednesdays at Geeks.Live. SP, you have American Thanksgiving tomorrow. Or for those of you who are listening to this afterwards, SP, you just had American Thanksgiving. I wanted to say, although Canadian Thanksgiving happens earlier, happy Thanksgiving, SP.
Oh, thank you very much. And happy non-Thanksgiving to you, I guess, up in Canada. But this is the start of the holiday season. We're going to be saying thank you very much for the next few weeks because we do value you as listeners. And as Stephen mentioned before, if you have a question to ask or a suggested topic, get that to us. Discord is one place you can get it to us. You can also email it to us. But go ahead, find us on our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord. And we'll either answer you or we'll talk about it on a future show.
On that note, for episode 209 of Better Podcasting, I'm Stephen Jondrew saying, whatever happened to Stephen's paint drying podcast? Where did it go?
And I'm SP saying, thanks for dropping by. We'll see you next week. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the GonnaGeek Network at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew of GonnaGeek Productions. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.